Good morning. I guess we ought to start this with the Go Texans, kind of get that out of the way. One of the things that I'm disappointed about today in our arrangement is the lights that we used to have during Christmas that mark the outline of this stage. They're gone. And my perspective of safety as I walk around here has been shattered. So I'm going to try, if you believe that, you'll focus the camera right here. I'm going to try to stay pretty much in the center, maybe on the stool, so that I don't leave the reservation and join you down there on the floor. I got to say to begin with that this morning is going to be comments basically about and from my perspective. So if I were you, I'd kind of dial down your expectation of anything so that you'll understand kind of where we are. One of the things that we need to start with is some unfinished business. Basically how we ended up last year financially. We were able to fund 51 of our 52 weeks of normal operations out of the funds that were offered. And we came up a little bit short in December, but we were able to satisfy all of our obligations, and we covered the shortfall out of the contingency from last year. You know, given all of the turmoil that occurred nationally and worldwide with regard to finances, with politics, even with the weather, we did pretty well. We could have done better. We probably should have done better, but we're going to save that for another day. You're probably, no doubt, familiar with the Sugar Grove story. How two congregations came together in the 90s to form what now is Sugar Grove. You're probably less familiar, or at least not as well versed, with the Sugar Grove journey. Basically, how we got from where we started to where we are now. Do you recognize us as you look back on 1998? You know, would you say that we are the same yesterday, today, and tomorrow? Probably not. We've changed. What happened? Where did we change? What were the influences? Were they all based on tradition? Or was it some influence of the culture around us? As a member of the Church of Christ, you're probably going to say, well, we're always going to be defined by our actions as a Church of Christ. Really, we probably want to look at that reality a little. One of the things I would ask you to do is to go back with me a few years, even a few decades, because I'm old enough to conduct that tour. And let's review kind of how we got here. Let's start with the routine that my wife and I had when our children were small. Every Sunday morning, we would lay out their church clothes for them to put on before service. Church clothes. Who in the world uses that phrase anymore? If you were to receive an invitation in the mail, it would probably tell you what the event was going to be and the date and the time and the place, and somewhere down there would be attire. And if they put church clothes, would you have a clue what to wear? Back in the old days, church clothes meant your Sunday go-to-meeting best. Today, it might be a suit and a tie. It also might be a Texan t-shirt, cutoffs, flip-flops, and no socks. Are we a product of our tradition or our culture? In the old days, a typical Church of Christ was said to be fully staffed if they had a full-time pulpit minister and a full-time church secretary. As the years would go by, they would recognize the need for a youth minister, somebody to come in and take over from the 70-year-old elder who had been tasked with taking care of the youth. And then a little while longer, an associate minister might be hired, somebody who would have tasks that were a little different than the pulpit minister. Maybe he would teach Bible class, ladies' Bible class, visit the sick, maybe the infirmed. Every once in a while, he'd been given the opportunity to preach on Sunday night. Did I mention that we used to have regular Sunday evening preaching services, complete with a communion service for those who were providentially hindered from attending the morning service? And then the song leader. He normally was a volunteer in a group of volunteers that kind of rotated through. Where are we today? How are we staffed? We have a pulpit minister. We have an associate minister. We have a youth minister. We have a body life minister. We have an outreach minister. And we have a slot for a worship minister. And all of those people are supported by a staff that is comprised of our finance manager, our building and grounds manager, our audio-visual manager, and even the custodial staff to kind of take care of the building. We've grown. Where'd that come from? What about the volunteers? I remember we used to have one song leader, Byron. Then we had two. Then we doubled down and we had four so that we could cover all the parts. And now we have a volunteer praise team that takes up the whole front row. Are we a product of our tradition, or have we been influenced by the culture around us that asks us to do more? What about facility? In the old days, a Church of Christ our size would have a beautiful, large auditorium. It would have ornate paneled walls. It would have high vaulted ceiling, exposed wooden beams, chandelier-type lighting that would hang down. And then down front on what was called more the podium or the platform, we hadn't gotten to the stage designation yet, there would be a pulpit, a huge pulpit. The preacher could stand with both hands stretched out and still have room in front of him for a library of resource materials. Behind him would be 2 or 3 throne-like chairs where the morning participants would sit and wait for their turn. And behind them, up a little higher, would be a glassed-in baptistry. You could see the water. And behind that, you would have a beautiful artist rendition of a Rocky Mountain scene of water coming down through the trees and across the rocks and ending up in the water. And on either side of that archway would be message boards. Now, not the electronic type that we know today with the things streaming. These were wooden boards with slats that you could slide the numbers in for the songs that we were going to sing that day. And on the other side, we might have pertinent information about attendance and the offering from last week and other information. Other parts of the building were dedicated to classes for all ages. You know, that's a term we've used throughout the year. And there might be a kitchen facility or fellowship area, but sometimes it was kind of separated from the main building. We won't go into that. And then there were offices for the staff. Where are we today? We have a fairly large auditorium. We now have wonderful screens here that enable us, with the use of the overhead projectors, to actually show the verses of Scripture that we're interested in. You can see the words to the hymns that we're going to sing. We have PowerPoint presentations. We have snippets of movies. Through Skype, we even have the opportunity to look into the living room of our missionaries across the world. It's an interesting thing. We still have a baptistry. It's a little smaller, but it's still functional. We have a much larger stage than I remember when I was growing up. We have a sound system that's highlighted by these washing machine-sized speakers that hopefully are well attached to the ceiling. And we have a lighting board of multicolored lights that can illuminate the presentations, the dramas, the things that go on down here on the stage. And then we have kind of a control booth back there with an electronic soundboard that it runs all of the microphones in here. And then in other parts of our building, we have specially designed facility for our children, more or less indestructible. And then back here we have specially designed by the youth, a youth area where they actually decorated and painted it up. And then as you go on through the building, we have classes for all ages. We have big rooms, we have little rooms, and we have fellowship areas. We have a commercial-sized kitchen now, and we have kind of a, what do we call that, a wet bar kind of deal for the fellowships back in the youth. You go on down the hall, we have offices for our staff, and at each of our entrances we have television monitors that actually give out information where the message boards used to, and now we have Grand Central. Where'd all that come from? How did we get to this point? How did we change? Is it a product of tradition? Or are we responding to the culture around us so that we can position ourselves to actually be of service not only to our members, but to anyone who would come and join us? Are we dedicated to ourselves, or are we beginning to reach out to the community? Are we changing some of our focus? You know, we could go through some of the other things that you old-timers might remember. The 5-day gospel meeting from a visiting evangelist. We could take you on a little descriptive ride on the joy bus and the fun we had trying to organize the whole entire neighborhood on a Sunday night. But we're not going to do that. We're going to stop kind of with where we are. Think about how our culture has defined us. Not totally, but it's helped to kind of shape the way we are. We're now focused on being involved in our community, to being involved in outreach. What does that entail? What challenge are we going to experience by being in the community? In 1970, I got my first introduction to the United Way. The chemical company that I worked for expected and more or less demanded 100% participation from the employees to give to that fund. The small Church of Christ congregation that we attended at that time, they expected 0% commitment. It seems that the Salvation Army was part of the United Fund, and the church leaders at that time had determined that the Salvation Army preached a gospel that was different than the one we had received. I'm not sure how the Apostle Paul would view that. But nonetheless, here we had an organization that in the name of Jesus was trying to do good work in the community, ease some of the suffering of people, and they were to be boycotted by members of the Church of Christ. Well, that was then. This is now. Where are we now? We as a fellowship, as the Sugar Grove Church of Christ, openly and with intentionality partner with other organizations in our community, even other fellowships, in the name of Christ, to ease some of the suffering that we see going on in our community. Have we succumbed to a culture that now violates our tradition? Even worse, violates the gospel that we've received? We're in interesting times. We don't want to be known as people who just come here. We'd like to reach out and provide some service in the community. There's going to be some challenges in doing that. We're going to associate with and partner with people who have a little different view of the gospel. How do we handle that? This is a part, maybe I shouldn't tell you that this really causes me to sit back and say, who are we? And how are we going to deal with this? There are going to be occasions in our attempt to serve others, to be a viable ministry to the community, where we're going to run into people who will openly come up and look you in the eye, and with all seriousness and even with a glow on their face, they're going to tell you that I came to Christ last night. I received Jesus. I've come to faith. I've appropriated the blood of Christ to forgive my sins. I've been saved. Wow. What do you do with that? It's an opportunity for us to be defined, not only the culture around us, but the culture of generosity. It's an opportunity for us to be generous in our understanding, to be generous in our toleration, to be generous in our acceptance of people where they are as they walk toward the Lord. It's different than what I grew up with. It turns me. I shouldn't tell you this. I'm kind of revealing something about me that Regis is always telling me I have intimacy issues, and this is part of it. I don't really want you to know what I'm thinking. But I think this is an opportunity for us to grow. This is an opportunity for us to use the Spirit that God gives us to be generously tolerant. There was a time when we were faced with that kind of reality that we would say, oh man, don't you know that you're supposed to be saved? There was a time that we would have said, I'm sorry, you're wrong. That time is gone. We need to use God's Spirit, His gift of being generous to other people with our attitude of acceptance. It's going to be a time of change. It's going to be a time where we allow God to define us with His generosity on a daily basis, not just when we're in here. It's when we're out there with people who really want to move toward the Lord. There'll be an opportunity, if we continue with the relationship, to sit down and study, to actually go over what God's plan is for His followers, for us to talk about what it means to be obedient, talk about baptism. But if we cut people off at the knees, we may not have that opportunity. So what we're fixing to do here in the next few weeks is begin a study on generosity. Where does that come from? Generosity comes from the example of our God. Let Him be our mentor. So, who is our God? What are His characteristics? What do we need to strive for so we can be like Him? If you're familiar, if you kept up with the NFL, and up until last night, the successful exploits of the Denver Broncos quarterback Tim Tebow, John 3:16 got lots of press. Well, maybe it's time for us just for today, pick out one verse and say, does that describe our God? John 3:16 starts off with, for God so loved the world that he gave his son. That's where we need to be. We need to be in love with his creation, his people. We need to be so in love that we give. We give even to the point of being sacrificial. He gave himself through his son. I think what God is going to ask us to do is to give ourselves in generosity to the people we come in contact with. It's going to be a little difficult. Some of the lessons that we're going to go through, when I heard we were going to study generosity for a month, I thought, man, how in the world can we have that much teaching on giving? Well, it's not about giving. It's not all about giving. It's not about the plate coming by here. These lessons are going to stretch us. Yes. Are they going to be all about money? No. Are they going to build on who we have become and who we would like to be? Yes. We are going to strive to be defined by the culture of generosity. Come, be a part of that. Mark does a much better job at explaining it than I will. So look forward to that. We're going to do something this morning that kind of falls back on tradition. We're going to offer an invitation. We've done that for years, for decades. We're going to continue to give any an opportunity to come to the Lord, to come to faith, to actually confess his lordship, to be buried with him in baptism. Last week we heard Brother Granville say that there was a day in his life that defined him. In 1954, he confessed that Jesus was Lord and he was baptized. Started his whole life. You want to do that today? We encourage you to. If you've got some prayer needs that you would like to come and bring before us, we'll be happy to pray with you. If you've decided that this may be the church home that you would like to be affiliated with, we'd be pleased to have you come join us. So we're going to be led in an invitation song. So as you stand, Sam and the praise team will begin that song.
This is my desire to honor you. Lord, with all my heart, I worship you, I worship you. All that is within me, I give you praise. All that I adore is in you, is in you. Lord, I give you my heart, I give you my soul. I live for you alone. Every breath that I take, every moment I'm awake. Lord, have your way in me. This is my desire to honor you. Lord, with all my heart, I worship you, I worship you. All that is within me, I give you praise. All that I adore is in you, is in you. Lord, I give you my heart, I give you my soul. I live for you alone. Every breath that I take, every moment I'm awake. Lord, have your way in me. And Lord, I give you my heart. I give you my soul. I live for you alone. Every breath that I take, every moment I'm awake.